Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Harmonious World. Thank you for joining me once more for this podcast, and it is a real honour this time to be joined by UK broadcaster and writer Alyn Shipton, who is a jazz historian. He knows everything there is to know about jazz. He's written books. He has a regular show on BBC Radio 3 called Jazz Record Requests. And he is an absolute phenomenon, but he is also a jazz bassist. And his ensemble, Alyn Shipton's New Orleans Friends, has a new album out, recorded live at the Church of St Giles in Oxford. That comes out on the 9th of March. And it's an absolute delight to be able to talk to him about this album, about a little bit about his experiences in New Orleans. Everybody in this band has spent time in the city, and the Crescent City is a very, very special place. As I'm recording this, it's just the day after Mardi Gras, and apparently the celebrations are still ongoing. But I'm looking forward to chatting with Alyn, and I hope you enjoy listening in. What you're listening to right now is Streets of the City. So I hope you enjoy listening to my conversation with Alyn Shipton. Good morning.
Hello.
There's a voice I recognise.
Hello and welcome to BBC Radio. All that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say before, I'm a little fangirling here because you've taught me so much about jazz over the years.
Well, that's very nice to know.
No, thank you. Well, thank you for joining me for Harmonious World. Alyn Shipton, the legend that is the journalist and writer and broadcaster of all about jazz.
Nearly all about jazz. I have done a few pop books. I ghosted Billy J. Kramer's memoirs and I wrote a biography of Harry Nilsson.
Oh, did you? I did not know that. There we go. But you're very knowledgeable about music, which I think is a very good thing.
Yes, I think it went in with the milk, really. I started listening to music as a small boy because when I was before I could walk, they put 78s on one of those gramophones which dropped down and one played after another so that my mother could do the housework without me interrupting her.
Little did she know that how good an education that would be.
Yeah, it stuck with me all the way through. But some of those tunes, I liked the Fat Swallow ones best because they were funny. And it was only I was about 5 and my dad said, "But aren't you listening to what they're playing?" And I said, "No, just listening to the funny lyrics."
My father introduced me to Flanagan and Allen at a very early age. And, you know, the comedy of that with their music was just lovely. So
Absolutely. And I think it's that kind of thing that draws a child in and then you realise what else is going on.
yeah, absolutely. And actually, I think that's a really important thing about music education is that we need to be making it fun because music is fun.
It is. And even the somberest music can lift your spirits when it's needed.
Yes. And just as the best Shakespeare tragedies have elements of comedy, and so the best, you know, I mean, if you can listen to the Wagner ring cycles, there are moments where you cannot help but laugh, even if that's kind of sometimes inappropriate.
Yes, although sometimes a joke does happen. I remember being at the Edinburgh Festival in the 70s when the new production of The Ring came on. And in the first one, Siegmund has to pull his sword out of a tree. Well, they just moved from Glasgow to the King's Theatre in Edinburgh, and they hadn't realised that the stage had a rake. So when Siegmund leant upwards to get the sword out, it was 2 feet higher than his hand. And so Alexander Gibson stopped the orchestra and went back to A and went tip tap tap. And the orchestra started again, and a bloke came on with a step ladder.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's brilliant. Well, it's a real delight to talk to you anyway. We could talk about music, I am sure, you know, until the cows come home. But we are particularly here to talk about the Oxford concert, which is your New Orleans Friends.
Yes, it's a band that, it's had various different lineups over the last few years. We founded it in 2019. I say we because it's a collective thing. And that was really for a festival in Davos. And it was the idea of Emil Martin, the drummer, who's the son of Barry Martin, who is a well-known revivalist band leader and went to live in the States and had a wonderful band called the Jazz Legends, which I was lucky enough to hear in London, with all kinds of people who were real. They really were legends. So Emil had this idea and put the band together, and we thought it went so well. We stuck together afterwards, and we did some concerts in the London Jazz Festival in 2019 and one or two other things. Um, but Adrian Cox, who was our clarinet player in that band, who also works with Bad Manners,
Yes, he
so
does. He works with all sorts of people.
yes, and he's now on the road with his own trio. So he's really just too busy to work with us anymore, though it's always nice when he does manage to come back into the fold, as it were.
Hmm.
So I thought, who can I get who's got that same real interest in the sound of New Orleans clarinet? I thought, well, my friend Tom Sankton, Tom had grown up in New Orleans. His father wrote the liner notes for lots of the Atlantic albums that were recorded there. And
Ah,
so he'd met all these legendary musicians as he was growing up. He's actually written a book about it called Song for My Fathers, which is a fascinating account of a young white boy growing up, but being mentored by the likes of George Lewis and Louis Cottrell and some of the other great clarinet players in New Orleans. And that was Tom's background. But he was a bright chap. He went to Harvard and then he got a Rhodes Scholarship to come to Oxford. So he turned up at the same time as I did. I'd just come out of school, so I was a bit younger than Tom. And one of our mutual friends said, Alyn, you do know there's this guy in Oxford now who plays clarinet in the style that you really love. So I was introduced to Tom, and we started a little quartet. And we didn't have a drummer, but another mutual friend of ours at Surrey University was the drummer Trevor Richards, who'd just come back from some time in the States studying, of all people, with the great New Orleans drummer Zutty Singleton. So there we had, I had direct contact to two people who'd worked with some of the founding fathers of the music. And I should say founding mothers too, because Tom had worked with quite a lot of the great singers and pianists in New Orleans who were female. So it's not just a male world. It's been quite important to us that the bigger picture is there.
yeah.
Anyway, so we had a little band in the early 70s. And when St. Giles Church in Oxford asked if I'd like to bring a band, the New Orleans Friends, to do a concert there, it just worked out that we could do that with Tommy on clarinet. And Emil was going to do it on drums, but for some reason, we were actually playing in Dorset the night before, and he got a text from the NHS to say, the operation you've been waiting for a long time on your tooth can be done tomorrow. So,
Oh,
so he actually whizzed back to London to have his operation done. But in the audience for that Dorset concert was Trevor Richards, who'd actually been staying in the country to see his brother, because Trevor now lives in Germany. And I said, what are you doing tomorrow night? He said, well, I'm driving back to Germany. I said, how'd you like to stop in at Oxford on the way? And he said, yeah, okay. And so he came and played the drums for us.
how fabulous. That's a great story. And how to end up on this album, which is an absolute delight.
Well, one of the nice things about Jazz at St. Giles is that for most bands, they have brilliant PA because it's a roomy church. It's got a lovely acoustic for natural music. But obviously, some types of band like to play through amplification. And the engineer there, David Carugo, is an absolute genius because he absolutely knows how the acoustics in the church work. So I said to David, look, the thing about our band is we don't use amplification. We play entirely acoustically. He said, well, don't worry. I've got all the gear there anyway, so I'll just record you. And that's how it came about. And
Right.
he actually caught, I think, very well the sense of acoustics of the building and the fact that we're using the building and the audience as part of the whole event.
Yes, absolutely. I actually heard Fergus McCready at a church in Cambridge at the end of the Cambridge Jazz Festival. And he they weren't performing acoustically, but I happened to be, well, no, I deliberately chose to sit right next to him so I could hear the real piano, and it was just wonderful. And there is something of that to your album, that you get the sense that you're sitting next to the band and you get that whole acoustic of it echoing around the church. It is wonderful sound.
Yes, and I think the balance that we get is our natural balance. You're not hearing
Yeah.
something where an engineer's been twiddling knobs. You're hearing something that is actually us adjusting to how we play. And I remember our previous album, which is the one we recorded at the London Jazz Festival with Adrian on clarinet. I had a good friend from the BBC who mastered it for me. And he said, I don't really need to do any mastering because when the band plays quietly, you all play quietly. And when you play loudly, you all play loudly. And it's about listening. The whole
Yeah,
thing is listening to one another and playing for the band and not for the individual.
yeah, yeah. That's the best jazz, isn't it?
Well, certainly it is for me. And I think that carries through almost all types of jazz. It's not just about the New Orleans stuff, but it works just as well. I've had a
Yeah.
project exploring the music of Jerry Mulligan. And when you
Oh,
know,
don't get me started.
well,
Yeah.
when you've got no chordal instrument and it's just three of you playing harmonic lines or melodic lines and weaving together, you really have to listen and play for one another.
Yeah. One of my favorite all-time gigs was hearing Jerry Mulligan at the Barbican, and I'd bought a ticket on the front row so I could hear the sound coming out of the bell of his sax. It was just earth. I mean, literally, I didn't want to move.
Yeah, it's a fantastic
Yeah.
sound.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was the idea of the Oxford concert, which was that we wanted to catch the band in an acoustic setting. And because the repertoire that we play has a lot to do with the New Orleans clarinetist George Lewis's concert called Jazz at Vespers, which was recorded ironically in Oxford, Ohio, in the 1950s. We've played quite a lot of concerts in churches revisiting that repertoire, um, in fact, including one in Oxford at, sadly, not a venue any longer, but St. John the Evangelist was a church that was converted into a great concert hall, and we played there. And one of the most moving moments is that there was a group of students from Africa who were actually postgraduate biology students, but they come along to the concert, and we were playing, I think it was Lily of the Valley, He's My Lily of the Valley, which is a song about Jesus. And suddenly this choir started singing with us. And I talked to all the band afterwards. The hairs went up on the back of our necks because suddenly the audience
Wow.
was singing. And I said to them afterwards, where did you learn? They said, oh, in school. This is what we sang in school. And
Yeah.
they loved it. They thought to come to Oxford and hear a band playing this music was just tremendous. And I think that's another thing you sense from the audience. We didn't have anybody so much singing with us in the Oxford concert that we've got on this new CD. But what we do have is lots of participation. You can hear the audience clapping at times
Yes, you can.
along with the band. And goodness me, they're clapping on the offbeat too, which is something
Yeah.
that you want.
Yes, exactly. Well, at this point in the podcast, I would like to play an extract from the Old Rugged Cross from this recording because I think that is well, it's a lovely tune anyway, but I think your rendition of it is particularly good. And I think you can hear the acoustic nature of that. Is the Old Rugged Cross a tune that you play often?
It is because it's so closely identified with George Lewis and with this style of jazz.
Yeah.
I've heard other clarinetists playing it. I mean, when I first got to New Orleans in the mid 70s, George Lewis had died a few years before. But some of the other players around at that time would do this music, partly in tribute to him, but partly because it's just there in the DNA of that generation of jazz musicians. And it was always a favorite with audiences. Um, if we heard it played, say, by Lewis Cottrell at the Heritage Hall, it's not his normal fare, but if somebody requested it, he'd do it. And I think that it was just one of those pieces that caught the imagination of the public because of the way that George Lewis had brought it into a wider audience.
Yes, I think it's probably one of the most recognizable tunes of that genre of jazz. I think it's probably one that most people go, yes, I've heard that. I don't know where I've heard it, but I've heard it.
Yes, I think so, exactly. And of course, just like our students hearing Lily of the Valley, it is the kind of thing that some people do get taught to sing in school.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And I think the nice thing about this album is if I was going to suggest to somebody that they listen to the sort of music that you might hear in New Orleans, this is where I would direct them. There is a special, I mean, jazz was born in New Orleans, and you've all got connections, haven't you, to that city?
Everybody in the band has spent time there. I think that's one of the important things because once we start playing, there's no need to say, oh, and when we do this, we go back to me and then we shift into this key or that key. There's not a shred of music on the bandstand. This is all stuff we all know by heart.
Yeah.
And it's important that, say, somebody like Martin Lytton, who's playing piano, Martin plays in all styles. He plays beautiful swing piano with my Buck Clayton Legacy Band, playing the music that Buck Clayton left me. But Martin's able to put his Jelly Roll Morton hat on and be in that New Orleans setting. And he does it tremendously well. He reminds me actually very much of a pianist called Don Newell from the States, who was actually in the Bunk Johnson band with George Lewis. I toured the UK with Don very sadly before he had a heart attack and we couldn't finish the tour. But Don was a tremendous player and he had exactly this feeling of how you integrate with a New Orleans style band, but the little bits of stride piano and Jelly Roll Morton thrown into the mix as well. And Martin's got that absolutely down to a T.
Yeah.
It's not copying, it's being something that we are all aware of. And none of us is deliberately setting out to copy anybody else.
No, there's an authenticity, and I think that there's a sense of almost paying tribute without being a tribute band, um, that I think you do particularly well.
Well, that's very kind of you to say so. And I think it was nice also on this particular session that we had Alan Gresty on cornet because I'd worked with Alan actually in some of the last six-piece bands that Chris Barber led. Because when Chris had his big band, every so often he liked to do a little session with the band like the one he'd started off with. And his trumpeter of choice was Alan. And it was always lovely to have somebody who understood that six-piece style very well. And although we don't have a trombone in this band, it's partly economics and it's partly that the people that we'd like all seem to live in places like Norway or Sweden or United States. So we just have a two-piece front line. And I thought Alan played beautifully. And it's not flamboyant. It's very restrained some of the time. He can open up. But again, it's got that feeling of playing for the audience and not for the musician himself.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that you're involved, aren't you, with the Royal Academy of Music?
I teach jazz history there. So this is, we don't really go into the New Orleans revival very much, but they do get a little flavour of George Lewis as we go through that. But mainly, one of the really interesting things now is that most students who come in have an idea that jazz kind of started somewhere between Charlie Parker and John Coltrane.
Yeah.
And I have to gently go back a little bit further. And it's always amazing how much people do actually know. I mean, in every year, we've got somebody who energizes the others into going to listen to some of the earlier music or music from different parts of the world as well.
Well, yes, that's right. And of course, 2026 is the anniversary of all sorts of the centenary of all sorts of things, including the birth of John Coltrane. And I think it's really important that he was. I always feel very drawn to John Coltrane anyway, partly because I was born in '63, so that was a big year for jazz, and I sort of feel like he was born in a big year for jazz, because 1926 it was sort of really starting to take shape.
All sorts of things are going on. Of course, Miles Davis was born that
That's
year as
right.
well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and so too was Stan Tracy. So, you can't
Was
forget
he
that.
actually?
Yeah. Yes, it'll be at Christmas time this year as his centenary coming up.
Wow. Gosh. Yeah. And I mean, he was obviously, British, part of what jazz meant to me as I was sort of starting to hear it and grow up with it. So.
Absolutely. And me too, though the pianist of his sort of ilk and generation who had most influence on me was Michael Garrick,
Oh,
because
yes.
Michael lived just up the road, and I grew up in Farnham in Surrey, and he did a number of big projects with the Farnborough Grammar School Choir, and we were allowed to go to the rehearsals. So when I was 16, I was there for a day of rehearsals with Ian Carr, Don Rendell, Art Feeman,
Wow.
Mick on piano, Coleridge Good, and I mean it was just amazing.
How fantastic. I'm in Hitchin in Hertfordshire, and we're just down the road from Wavendon. And so John Dankworth and Cleo Lane, and because their kids came to school actually just up the road from here. So I grew up, that music was just something that I kind of heard all the time, really. So.
Well, it was very strange you should mention John, because my school used to play in something called the Farnham Festival, and they used to commission new music from composers. So when I was 9, I played The Burglar's Footsteps in Theo Musgrave's Marco the Miser on woodblocks. So, and and then Richard Ronnie Bennett wrote a piece for my opposite neighbour to play on piano with the orchestra. And then in the orchestra, when I was 16, I think, John Dankworth wrote a piece called Tom Sawyer's Saturday. And it was mainly for the youth orchestra, but my music master had said, well, there's 2 players in this that you can actually allow to play a bit of jazz. The bass player seems to know what he's doing, and so does one of the trumpeters. And so the piece is mainly for the orchestra, but there's a lovely solo trumpet part. And then I get quite a lot of playing underneath the narrator, just with the rhythm
Oh,
section.
lovely.
And John came and rehearsed it with us, and Cleo was at the rehearsals too. So their commitment to youth
Oh,
music
yeah.
goes right back. And then going over to the stables later on and hearing things, I realized it wasn't just us, it was anybody they came into contact with. They really wanted to infuse and help and urge on in the music.
Yes.
And both of them, I think, did that tremendously well.
Yes, they did. They really did. I can't even remember how. Bill Lesage, the vibes player.
Yes.
Yeah. He asked me to do a New Year's Eve gig at the old stables, as when it was properly like a stable block. And I was there and I was playing. I was on baritone, and then there was Bill, and I wish I could remember who the rest of the band was. It's really annoying. But as I was playing at one point, I could hear an alto behind me. And I was like, hang on a minute, this is my gig. And then I realized it was John Dankworth. And I was like, yeah, okay, it's really your gig, so that's fine. So I think he'd been booked, but was flying back from somewhere else. There was something, that he got held up for or something. So yeah, that was brilliant. Playing with him was amazing.
Very John. And it's wonderful he did that. I was lucky enough, BBC commissioned us to go to South Africa in 2005, which was the 50th anniversary of his attempted tour there,
Oh, yeah.
where they wouldn't let Cleo sing
Yeah.
For obvious reasons
Yeah.
to do with the party. And we went back to see how many of the musicians that John had helped to leave South Africa and find careers in the UK or America were doing. And I've never been anywhere where somebody's been received with such open arms.
Wow.
And at the end of the week, we went to a very, very famous restaurant, which I won't name, in Joburg, because John said, well, I'm going to take you out. We'd had a wonderful week and I want to treat you. Anyway, when we got there, very unexpectedly, it was full. And we hadn't reserved, because he said, oh, you never need to reserve. You just go. Anyway, he said, oh, well, I'm going to do something I've never done before. And he called over the maitre d' and he said, I'm sure you have a reservation. The name is Dankworth, Sir John Dankworth. And the rake went, oh, and disappeared to the back. And suddenly the manager came out and went, Johnny, I haven't seen you since your flat in Belsize Park in 1960.
Goodness me. Yeah.
And so we were given the full treatment.
Wow.
But he said he'd never done it before or since, just used the title, but on that particular occasion.
Oh.
But of course, what that meant was we were meeting a lot of people that John had helped because the manager got on the phone and
Ah,
suddenly we had people around the table all thanking John for everything he'd done for those musicians. And, all the people that we uh, met from Hugh Masekela on just gushed with
yeah,
their enthusiasm for John when he was out of the room.
right.
And it was always nice that, Johnny Mekwa, him, there were so many others that just came in and said he really helped.
Yeah. Oh, how fantastic. That's and I think, you and I are of a certain age that, we grew up playing and playing alongside and hearing those guys, Bull's Head at Barnes and, all of these places that just some, you mentioned Stan Tracy earlier, and, he was such an important part of the British jazz scene. And then with playing with other people when they came over from the States.
I was talking to a couple of people in the States about this too, because we're lucky enough to have been there when it was easy just to go and chat to the band
Oh,
in
yeah.
neutral or to get to know people. And I worked in New York in the early 80s and I had the same experience there. And it was nice to go and hang out with people like Ron Carter and Jim Hall and co. I mean, there was never anybody there for the first set of their
Yeah.
Monday night
Yeah.
gig at the Village East. So I used to go there. And it didn't seem strange that you could go, and I remember going to hear Jack DeJohnette doing a set playing piano with a trio and Charlie Persip on drums. I mean, and Art Blakey came and sat at the next table because he said, well, I haven't heard him playing piano before, and which was announced to the room,
Yeah.
not just to me.
Yeah.
But it was that kind of free and easy thing. And I can think of two or three musicians who've said, you can't do that now because there's always management,
Yeah.
there's always people in the way. It's very difficult to have that kind of informal contact with people who almost invariably help you.
Yeah. 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 No, absolutely. And we'll share their experience and their, guidance and those little
Absolutely.
snippets
Yeah.
that, just mean something. Yeah.
And I'm circling around here because, of course, that is exactly what happened to all of us in New Orleans. And I think you can hear that on the album because,
Absolutely.
we've really all, I think, absorbed something of the city. And if someone were just to walk in off the street in New Orleans and hear this, they wouldn't think it's a load of Brits trying to pretend to be American musicians.
No, because you're not pretending, are you? You're not, you're doing your thing. And it is when you live and breathe that kind of music and then you just take it in. And like you say, you're not copying because that's not what jazz is about. You can't actually, can you?
Well, I tried copying, and I always like to try and play like Slow Drag, the bass player in the George Lewis band, which meant a lot of slapping the bass. I got some help from various bassists who were there. So I talked to Chester Zardis, who I won't repeat his rather rude instructions to how I could toughen my fingers up, but they were all very helpful. But then I realized that that's not really where I wanted to be. And two people helped me, one of whom was Frank Fields, who's a great bass player. He'd worked with all kinds of rhythm and blues bands as well as jazz groups. And he just said, just play the instrument, let it speak.
Mm.
And the other person was Walter Payton, who is the father of Nicholas Payton. And he played in the New Orleans Ragtime Orchestra. So I met Walter when we did a joint tour in the 70s, I think, with the London Ragtime Orchestra, in which I played. And Walter was fantastically helpful. And he said, yes, it's great to do two beat. You don't have to slap to do that. You can just do it, and then the bass will speak. And if you're playing entirely acoustically, as you like to do, use the instrument to fill the room.
Yeah.
Don't make some kind of percussive sound to do it. So, although I can still do it, I almost never play slap bass. Now I'm playing what I think is a conventional New Orleans style bass line, but played using all the instrument rather than a technique that some people still use very effectively, but I decided to leave to one side.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Honestly, it's such a pleasure to talk to you, Alan. It really is. Thank you.
Well, it's been great. A lovely time to look back and reminisce. So you're going to play another track to see us out?
Yes. So the track I'm going to play as we finish is the Algiers Strut.
Written by Kid Thomas Valentine, which is the first band I heard live in New Orleans, and it pays tribute to his little suburb over the Mississippi.
Thank you for joining me for that episode of Harmonious World. And as Alan and I discussed, what you're listening to now is Algiers Strut. What a joy that was. And please do check out all of the links in the show notes. Have a good week, and thank you for joining me once more for Harmonious World. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and it's a great delight to bring this series of discussions with musicians and composers and writers and all sorts of people to you. Obviously, there's no point in having a podcast if people aren't listening, and I'm very grateful to my listeners for doing so. Thanks also to Joe English for composing and performing this new theme tune. So wherever you get your podcast, you can leave a review. You can share this with your friends and family, either as a link or on social media and that sort of thing. I'd be really grateful for that. Don't forget that you can subscribe now. There's a link wherever you get your podcasts. So have a great week, and please remember why I started this, which is just to try and make the world a little more harmonious. Thanks for listening to Harmonious World.